Everybody. My name is Francine Ryan. I'm a senior lecturer in the law school and I'm director of the Open Justice Centre. And I'm delighted to be hosting this chat tonight with Julian King, who is a barrister, and he's going to talk you all through his journey from being a law student, an OU law student, which is very important to stress, to his very successful career at the bar. I had the pleasure of being Julian's tutor many years ago, and it is amazing when you get to keep in touch with OU students and find out how fantastic they are doing and how fantastic their careers are. So I've got a series of questions that I'm going to ask Julian, but please feel free to put questions in the chat. We will open it up at the end to ask questions, and Polly's going to keep an eye on the chat, and if there's other things that we will kind of cover as we go along. And it might be that I've covered some of the stuff that you would want to ask in the questions, but if things that are missing, please do pop something in the chat. We want to make this kind of informal and really useful for you guys, so please, just let us know what things you want to ask if I haven't covered them already. So without further ado, and I've got a series of questions, so if I look to the side, it's just to remind me of the questions, because unfortunately my brain will not comprehend all of them without having my list in front of me. So Julian, welcome. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I just thought we could start with, could you tell us a little bit about your journey from being an OU law student to being a barrister?
Well, absolutely. And thank you very much for inviting me. And hope everybody enjoys the session. I suppose it's worth going a little bit further back in time because I am an advocate for the OU, because obviously, as you already said, that's how I got my law degree. But I'm one of those people that came to the bar later. So I became a barrister as a second career. So my academic career going back after school goes back as far as going to Lancaster University, which Francine, of course I did. Back in 1990, I was a history student there, and I did a history degree, 3 years, 1990 to 1993. That was me, and then left at 21, having no idea. I've given my age away now by telling you I was 21 in 93, having no idea what I was going to do with my life, and so I left and then volunteered for Oxfam for a year and worked sort of part-time jobs and fell into making an application for the police, and I became a policeman in 1995. Joined as a constable in Greater Manchester Police. I worked there in uniform, walking the streets of the east side of Manchester, if anybody knows that part of the world. So Hyde and Stalybridge and Tameside, all those areas. And then I changed to become a detective, and I worked on murder squads, and then became an economic crime specialist. And I was working as a police officer, and I would investigate the big multi-million-pound frauds. I then linked up with the Serious Fraud Office and worked down in London, then across the UK and Europe, investigating large-scale frauds. During that time, the police helped fund me through a master's degree in fraud management, which I had a particular interest in, specialising in looking at long-firm frauds and working with the Serious Fraud Office. And I was doing some really long trials at that time. So it was, I'd be what we would call as a police officer, the officer in the case. And what that meant was you were the person who had the case from the beginning when the report came into the police, and you investigated it, you kept it, you dealt with obtaining and collating the evidence. You'd see it from a certain aspect because you'd be there arresting people. You'd have a plan, a strategy, how you're going to deal with the case. You'd look at the evidence you brought in. You'd start to prepare a file. You'd be seizing exhibits, going across the country, obtaining statements, thinking about the forensic opportunities and the financial information and inquiries you wanted to obtain. And all alongside of that, you're preparing the file for prosecution, recording the unused material, and thinking about then moving slowly towards what would eventually become a court hearing if you managed to charge the suspects in any case. And then I would then see the liaison with barristers. And of course, you'd go and give evidence in court, and you'd have the terrifying moment you first give evidence in the magistrate's court, stood on your feet, and somebody's cross-examining you. And then more terrifying is you turn up at the Crown Court, and then there's somebody in a wig and gown and a very serious-looking judge, and she or he would ask you some very difficult questions, and then you think, wow, well, this is different. But I was excited by it, and years before I even did my first degree, I thought, well, this is something I could maybe be interested in. So whilst I was working in economic crime, I decided to try and move that way and think about, well, maybe I could come to the bar, maybe I could be a barrister. It's a big career change. I was in my 30s at that point, thinking, well, actually, perhaps there's some value in having life experience. And the one thing I do know about having studied through the OU and for a short time having been a lecturer on the law degree with the OU is that one of the great values is that the OU embraces people with a variety of backgrounds. And I looked at that. I could have done what's called a conversion course because I already had a degree. I could have done a shorter course to get to the point where I could then move towards the specialist courses to become a barrister. But I decided to do the full law degree through the OU because one, it was so flexible, and two, I knew it had good academic rigor and was well thought of. But it suited me in the reality of having to work full time. So I was still a police officer working in what was called the economic crime section at Greater Manchester Police, liaising with the Serious Fraud Office, moving around the country. But I still had to have some sort of eye on how I was going to do the studies alongside the full-time job. So I got to the point where I thought, well, the OU's for me. So I think it was, I'd done my master's degree, and I think it was 2006. I started, all that way back, and I did it over 4 years, each one of the modules over 4 years. Very challenging because you're working full time, but doable if you plan and organize yourself. I had 3 young children at the time. That was so they were born in 2000, 2002, and 2006. So just at the point I've got a brand new baby. we had a house extension. I was working full time as a police officer and studying. So that was particularly challenging. Went through the 4 years of the course. But once you've done your law degree, so I got my law degree, and we can talk more about that maybe in a moment. But you then have to choose if you're going to become a specialist in the law and you want to be a lawyer. You're either going to become a solicitor, and I'm sure most of you know this, or you're going to become a barrister. And I always wanted to be on my feet in court. I was going to say not showboating. I don't mean show. I do a bit. Because I do enjoy it, and that's the art of persuasion. That part of the career, rather than the solicitor route, which is a slightly different focus. And so to do that, if you're going to become a barrister, you have to do something called the Bar Professional Training Course. So I then, having finished the law degree, I then applied to study at Manchester Met, MMU. There's one of a number of providers across the country that do a law degree. It's normally 9 months full time, but of course I had to support young families, so I was I looked at there was a part-time option, just like the law, just sort of similar version of flexibility for me. So that was working 2 nights a week, sessions, practical advocacy sessions, and then usually something at the weekend for over 2 years. So if I did the 4 years over the law degree and then 2 years on the bar course, and as I was getting towards the end of that, it was then time to make applications for pupillage. And you're thinking about trying to apply to get to the bar. You go on this horrendous system called the Pupillage Gateway. You make applications to different chambers across the country, put yourself forward, and it's a bit like falling into an episode of The Apprentice. If you get an interview, you're then whisked away to some chambers somewhere in the country, and you undertake all these different tasks. So it might be writing an article, it might be some advocacy, interviews, and then you try to whittle your way down through all of that process. I applied to quite a few different chambers across the country. I was lucky enough to get an offer for pupillage in London as well as Manchester, but for me it was sort of thinking practicality about it was obviously the Manchester was the choice I took, and so I then had the offer of pupillage. So I was one day sat in a police station in Manchester in October 2014, at the beginning of that month. 2 weeks later, I was sat in chambers starting my new career, thinking at the age of 41 or whatever it was, thinking, what on earth have I done? Big change in life, changing career. So took away, and I'd done almost 20 years. I was just a couple of months off 20 years in the police. And so it's a big step, but a refreshing one, I would say, because it was fulfilling a lifelong ambition, really, to move forward in the law, and it felt like a new start in a way, a new challenge.
Yeah.
And so that's how I started, and I can tell you, if you want, Francine, about what that first year is like, if that helps.
Yes. Before you just talk about that, just talk to me a little bit about, like, what, when you were thinking about chambers and you were thinking about the areas of law, had you already thought about the areas of law that you might be interested in, and was that aligning it to your previous career, or had you got other interests that you kind of wanted to explore? Because I think that's really interesting when you've had such a particular career like yours. Do you take that and use that as your selling tool, or do you want to kind of move away from that?
That's an interesting question, because I had a few thoughts about that, because of course there's a wide range of areas of law you could go into. So I thought it was an obvious sort of sell, which is to go towards the criminal law. But I did do a couple of applications for purely civil pupilages, as they would call them. So that would have been very different. So that would be doing like things like personal injury or commercial or contractual disputes, those sorts of areas. And whilst it wasn't immediately natural to me, I thought maybe that could be an area I could go into. It would be a completely new start. I wouldn't have sort of a USP, sort of unique selling point in a way, but that's other than life experience, which I think actually is hugely important. We can talk more about that. But it seemed to me I had a bit of a head start with the criminal background, and I had an interest in this anyway. And really what I was inspired by was seeing, when I was in court as the officer in the case, giving evidence or helping a barrister prepare the case, and I was sat in court passing exhibits up and whatever it might be, helping with witnesses. I thought, I want to be stood there with the wig and gown on, addressing the judge, and most importantly, doing a jury speech. And I thought, that's what I want to do. So the criminal law was for me. But I did add on some extra bits, because you're not just tied. If you go to the criminal law, you don't just tie in necessarily to one thing. So we can talk more about how my practice developed. But it's before I left the police, I was involved with looking at police discipline work and looking about that sort of that aspect, really. So there's a whole range of professional discipline cases that are available to barristers. It's a very specialist field, and it's actually my main area of work now. And so I represent police officers accused of gross misconduct in their office. I also present cases for the General Medical Council in relation to doctors and misconduct in relation to them, and issues of fitness to practice. And so I thought, well, actually, what you can do is start in one area, but you can branch out. And I knew that I wanted to try and sample other areas as you go through. So as you're feeling your way into the career, it was going to be criminal, which was an obvious sort of starting point. But then adding on the professional discipline work, and then I wanted to branch out, as I've done, which into inquests. So where there's a death, and there needs to be an investigation as to who the person was, where they were, when they died, and how they died. There's a hearing route for that. I've also moved into public inquiries and that kind of area work, and health and safety work. So the Health and Safety Executive are one of a number of organisations that have the power to prosecute cases beyond just the Crown Prosecution Services people would be, and I would be familiar with, and I prosecute and defend in both of those. And so as you start, your career can go out into different paths and different areas. So you don't necessarily start in one spot and end in that spot. You've got a range of options, and sometimes something will happen. You'll experience a case that you weren't expecting and think, well, I quite like that. I might want to do that as a career. The point is, I think, get to if you know you like the law, you like being a barrister, or you want to be a solicitor, if you want to be in that area, get going, but things may take you into other avenues that you weren't
So you've got to be
expecting.
kind of adaptable to the fact that you'll practice and opportunities might come your way, and you've got
Yep,
to make the most of those opportunities, haven't you? So
absolutely.
tell us about that first year and what that was like in terms of doing a pupillage and then getting an offer. I think they call it tenancy, don't they? After
Yeah,
you've done your first 6 months.
yeah. So it's in equal parts terrifying, exciting, um, and um, unlike anything I've experienced before. So it's a bit like if you've ever watched the series from years ago. Do you remember Silk?
Yeah.
That was sort of it had bits of truth in it. Although the pupil in that case stole his wig off Fleet Street and ran down the road with it. I don't
Yeah.
think I've ever seen that happen. Um, um, it's meant to be 12 months pupillage. So you start in chambers, and for those that don't know, chambers are the traditional way barristers. There are barristers that are employed, but the traditional way is all barristers are effectively self-employed, but they are banded together in places called chambers. And although you're self-employed, the chambers have a particular standing, so they can recruit you, and then they have the standing with the regulators, so the Bar Standards Board and the Bar Council. They are allowed to offer pupillage, so you are trained and work in an environment where you are then authorised to practice. You've got the right safeguards and support mechanisms in place. What technically then happens is, although you're self-employed, it doesn't always feel that way. You have a series of, you do a case, say for if you're prosecuting a criminal case for the CPS, they will pay you via your chambers, and then you will get a sum of money, but you would get charges off that. So you would pay for your clerks, for your admin team, for your building, and so you would then support the administrative team around you. And then the barristers are grouped together in chambers and they have their own reputations. And so you very much feel like you're in part of a small group, and then you move forward. And sometimes you might move chambers. I've moved once in my career, and you might stay there. But pupillage, going back to that. So if you've got into chambers, you've sort of got the holy grail of a place on pupillage. Your first 6 months normally is you shadow a pupil supervisor. They used to be called pupil masters. So you shadow a more senior barrister who's appropriately qualified, and they will go around doing their cases, and you just literally follow them to see how it's done. And what you're doing is picking up all the little practical details about, right, where is this court? Where's the best place to park? Where's the
Very important.
What's the cheapest place to get a coffee before I walk into court? Make sure I've got my wig and my gown with me, and I've got my bag, and I've got all my bits and pieces, my laptop and all my wire, all the practical stuff, making sure you're doing all of that. And then in the background, you're supporting them with the research, technical questions, things for the case, and they're testing you as well as they go, well, I'm about to do cross-examine a witness today. What do you think are the points we need to ask this witness to, for example? And then you sit behind this person all the way through, and you'll meet solicitors who are instructing you. You will meet clients, lay clients. You'll get the judges will see you, things like that. And you start to get used to the environment, and that's all very useful. And as you sit there, you think, oh well, I might have done that differently, or I could have done that better. And then as you get closer to 6 months, you think, oh, hang on a minute, doing it myself is going to be a bit different. And then you get to the point at 6 months, you then are on your feet, as they call it, and that is when you're still in your probation period, your pupillage, but you're allowed to do cases on your own, and you still have a tie to your pupil supervisor, but that you start to give cases, or you're giving cases by your clerks, and they say, Mr. King, we've got you a trial, and then you're off. And you might prosecute a list in the magistrates' court. I used to go to Blackpool Magistrates Court and have you'd turn up at court first thing in the morning at 9 o'clock when the court doors opened. You'd walk into the CPS room, and then 5 trials papers would be plonked on your desk, and they'd say, right, Mr. King, you've got 3 assaults, 1 domestic matter, and you've got a burglary and 3 other things. Right, okay. 2 of the witnesses are outside. 1's crying. 1 person's having an argument with somebody else, and there are 5 police officers wanting to speak to you. And then you'd read through it all very quickly. It's a bit better these days. It's now you get the papers the night before for the magistrates' court list, I'm told, and then you'd go off and you'd learn your trade by sort of presenting those cases and prosecuting those cases, and then you'd start to get briefs from solicitors. Defence solicitors might say, we'd like Mr. King to do a small trial for us, and you'd start doing that. I started to get some police misconduct work, so I was asked to represent police officers and started to do that. That's different. You're not in front of a jury. You're not in a magistrate's court. You're usually in a police headquarters doing a tribunal hearing in front of 3 people with it used to be a legally qualified chair, but now it's in front of a senior officer, so an assistant chief constable or a chief constable, and they're hearing the actual case. And so you start to get those sorts of cases, and then you move through. My pupillage was cut short by a few months because of my previous 20 years experience. So they took 3 months off it. So I did the 6 months and then did another 3. And then I was through. And then you are either signed off or not. The chambers have to then make a decision as to whether they keep you, whether you get, as you identified, Francine, whether you get tenancy. And so I had that point where you get the email come through, you've made it, you're on. And that's it. And so that was the first year. I think, does that answer the question?
Yeah, exactly. And that must have been like quite a kind of roller coaster in terms of, like, you know, everything is new, isn't it? And you know, in my former life, I was a solicitor. I used to go to court quite a lot as a trainee, and but nothing comparatively speaking to what it's like for you guys as barristers. But how did you kind of manage that kind of just everything being so new and juggling, like papers are literally just given to you, you've got to think on your feet. How did you kind of manage that process, and what did you kind of draw on to help you with that?
In terms of managing
everything that's so new, like finding your place, getting his papers literally given to you and then having to go in front of a magistrate, prepping cases, all of that. How did you did it just come naturally to you, or did you have like a process that you used, or is it you just have to kind of learn to be uncomfortable with being uncomfortable?
You definitely have to learn to be uncomfortable at times and embrace sort of not all stress is a bad thing. I would say. You're fine though if you've been, as many people are, if you've been an open university student. What you've done is you've juggled your life and your studies, and so you're already used to a lot of pressure. You're already used to having to organize yourself, and you unlike students who are graduating at 21 going straight into their career, you've already juggled having to work late in the evenings and at weekends and all of that kind of thing. And so some of that's not a surprise. The volume of it and how quickly you're meant to sort of respond to stuff, that is a shock, and there's no way around that. And if you absolutely can't cope with last minute briefs and then the uncertainty of things changing, the criminal law probably isn't for you. If you like things to be a bit more stable, some of their other areas of law are more stable, and there's more certainty as to your instructions, when you're going to be somewhere, when you're going to do this, but it certainly the areas I went to was a movable feast, is probably the best way to describe it. So being organized, accepting it's going to be really hard work. I've got a great support mechanism at home with family, so I'm lucky in that regard. And it would have been a challenge to have had no support, but there are people that do it and they have my respect. But I think if you're organized and willing to accept that it's going to be hard work, then it's doable. I have noticed, Francine, we've got a few questions that popped in. Are we waiting to the end to answer those? Or
I'm gonna. There's a couple of them that are already on my list, but I've got them to my side, so don't worry. I'll keep an eye on those.
Okay.
And just tell me if there is such a thing, but what does like a typical day now look like? Sort of nearly, have you been practicing 12 years now? Is that right? My maths is correct.
So 2014, sort of that sort of length of time. So
now you are established, definitely. So what and you've got a bit more control, presumably, about the kind of work that's coming, well, to some extent, because you've got a reputation now, you know the kind of work that's coming in. So is there such thing as a typical day? What does it look like?
Yeah, there's not a typical day as such, but I could take you through some sort of how some days look.
Yeah.
I'm lucky in the sense that I got, because of my age, and a bit of experience, I got to take on more serious cases more quickly. So
Right.
I've got quite a lot of control now over where I am with my practice, and that doesn't always follow. But I think, as the years move on, you do tend to get that. So the reality is that a typical day will change depending on which part of work, the area of work I'm in. So if I'm doing a police officer case, for example, if I'm appearing in front of a tribunal, I might be staying at any part of the country because I travel all over England and Wales doing my cases. Yep. So I might wake up in a hotel room or an Airbnb, which I'm now fond of, because then I can do my own cooking.
Yes.
And I'll be prepping stuff the night before, and I'll be doing it again in the morning. Then I'll go to usually a police headquarters, and I might meet the police federation or my solicitor, and I might then be cross-examining witnesses in front of a tribunal through the day. I might be making closing speeches to them. If I'm in a criminal trial, it might be up early, off to court, wherever it might be. So I do criminal trials all over the country, but generally you do them more locally. So I might jump. So I live in the south of Manchester. I might travel up to Preston or Carlisle. I might go down to Chester or Stafford or Stoke or any of the Manchester or
all these glamorous places.
Minchell Street Crown Court or Crown Square, as we call it, the two Crown Courts in Manchester or anywhere. But I'll travel to court, and it might then be getting to court will be grabbing a coffee. You'll see coffee features heavily in my life. Good coffee, and get to the robing room, hopefully see a few familiar faces and have a quick chat. Get your gear on, so it's wig, gown, collars and bands. And I'd be lying if I didn't say I quite like dressing up. I do. I'm one of the people that think we should keep them. Not everybody does. And then it will be try and find your courtroom. If you're prosecuting the case, you might go down to the CPS room. There's usually a little office tucked away somewhere with lots of CPS lawyers running around frantically, copying bundles, preparing things for a trial in court 1, trying to find witnesses for court 2, running around all the different courtrooms. And then you might then go up to court, try and find the usher, find out what's happening where you are in the queue, get into court, and then it might be cross-examining in front of a judge and jury or closing speeches. I might have a conference at lunchtime, squeeze that in for half an hour. I might have a pre-hearing on another case which is remote over a video link in the evening at 5 o'clock, 5:30. I might have, if it's a day when I'm not in court, I might have conferences with solicitors. I'll do a lot more now over video than I used to.
Right.
So we use Microsoft Teams to do not only some hearings, but also initial meetings with clients. Some clients are very comfortable with that. Some need a face-to-face, but I might do that. And then a lot of preparation work. So preparing skeleton arguments, opening speeches, sentencing notes. It might be submissions and mitigation. I just recently, last week, I was making an application of abuse of process to have a case stayed. So I had to prepare a very detailed bundle. The week before, I was in the High Court in Birmingham, before a High Court judge in relation to a judicial review case. And so the great thing about it is there are very few days that are exactly the same. You're always working on a new case, different story, and there's always, I love the story behind it, the personal element, the motivations, what happened to people, why they made certain decisions, how that came about, and the strengths and weaknesses in the evidence. You're always looking at something that's slightly different, and each case is always at a different point. What you're always doing, I always have my to-do lists, and I'm looking at that case. These things are absolutely urgent and must be done. These things I need to be looking at, but it's not so bad. These things can go a bit further back, because you can very quickly get yourself in a mess by prioritizing work that doesn't need to be ready for tomorrow, but other bits do. And so you've got to be very organized. So every day I'm always moving those things around. So that's not a typical day, is it? But it's the best I can do.
But that's the thing. I think that's important to say, and I think that's important for students to recognise that there isn't a typical day. So you need to be somebody who's comfortable with that. If you like regularity, routine, you know what you like. If you know what you want to do every day, then probably being a barrister isn't for you. And I think it's important to know what's not for you as it is for what is for you. And just to add, do you do quite a lot of work in the evenings as well?
A lot. Yes, and I'm afraid if that's something you simply can't face and think it's inappropriate, and there are arguments to say it is, I suppose, but it's not the right career for you, because I'm afraid the the requirements on you are inevitable, that you will need to work in the evenings. I work 6 days a week, and I'm not saying that's a good thing, and it's not a brag. I actually stopped at lunchtime and did something I never do today. I went and played paddle with my son.
Oh, okay.
And I won.
Oh,
And I'm
excellent.
53 and he's 19, so he's very unhappy. But they're rare moments, so you've got to be pretty organised. It's important to take time out, but I never work on a Saturday, or very rarely. And do try and take time out to do things with family, but it's a big commitment, and I work most nights later than people would expect, maybe if you're in a 9 to 5 job. So I might work, and if I'm in the middle of a case, I'm working. So when I've got a hearing that's running when I'm representing someone, I might work most of those nights in the week.
So I think again, it's important to recognise that it's a life, isn't it? Being a barrister, it's more than a job. It is a whole lifestyle, and whether that's good or bad, but you need to know that you're the kind of person that wants that. Okay. So I'm going to pick up a couple of questions in the chat. But so Alex asked a really good question. What advantages did your prior career in policing give you when transitioning to the bar, particularly when you were handling serious and complex cases?
That's a great question. I think it did give me a head start in many ways, because I knew what a lot of the forms looked like. I knew what files looked like. I was experienced. If you're thinking about, say, an interview with a suspect, I was experienced in interviewing, so I knew what officers were asking and why they were asking those questions. And so it did give me a head start in some ways, and especially representing officers in misconduct work. I did a little bit of work with professional standards. That each force will have a professional standards branch. Before I left the police, I worked with them a little, and that gave me an insight into how they work, what the issues are. So I would say it helped, but the reality is there are lots of people that don't have that background and do perfectly well and specialise in working in prosecuting cases. So it was helpful, but I wouldn't say it was. I think there are people that do it, and there's a history of police officers that have changed career and become barristers, but it's not that off. It's not that common. So most people go through university, might do 1 or 2 jobs, but then they start as barristers, and they don't have that background. So it was helpful, but it wasn't decisive, I would say.
Marion has asked a question. As barristers are self-employed, you don't have a set salary. How hard is it to get enough cases? Is there a lot of stress to ensure you've got a stable income? And obviously, in your case, you had 3 children as well to support, and a family. So you gave up a guaranteed salary for this world.
It's there's 2 things you should know. One, all barristers, even if they say they're not, they are like frustrated actors, because they don't feel that they're special. And I'm no different. Oh dear, giving away all my secrets. But they also are all obsessed with whether or not where's the next case coming from. And we also, it'd be lovely to be quiet next week, but then as soon as you are quiet, why haven't I got any cases? And they're on to the clerk saying, why don't you love me anymore? There isn't a set salary, and so I only earn if I work. So if I take a holiday, I'm not earning anything. And I will take a holiday. So it's wrong to think that your salary is worked out on working on an average case basis every week for every week of every year, every month of each year, because you've got to take some time off. Everybody needs it. My experience was that actually, if you're in reasonable chambers, the work tended to come in pretty well, but you then develop relationships with solicitors and with people that want to instruct you, and that the work becomes more frequent, and the better work comes in as you get more experience. But even if, as a starting point, there's a lot of work out there, especially for barristers. And there was an article in the Times about a year ago, and I think in the last 6 or 7 years, there's been a huge drop off. I think the criminal bar has decreased in size by about 20%. And that was because of lots of issues to do with salary, working pressure, and cuts and that sort of thing. But the reality is, you've probably all seen in the newspapers there's a massive backlogs of thousands of criminal cases. And so there's no shortage of work out there. If you're committed and want to have a career in the criminal law as a barrister, you would be pretty busy, even if you are not setting the world on fire. But it would be, it's still a busy, brutal existence.
Yes.
But there is work, and you find that your salary is spiky. So that's very hard to get used to. I had 20 years of being a police officer when you're every month, same day, your salary dropped into your bank account. There we go, and on you go.
Yeah.
Now you've got an accountant, you've got clerks, and you've got a bank account that's desolate for weeks. Nothing's happening, and then all of a sudden, for 3 or 4 cases, well, you'll get paid. And I've got loads of money, and then you've got to have the discipline to realise, no, you don't. That's not all yours.
Yeah.
Some of that's your VAT, some of that's your income tax, some of that's your chamber's expenses. You've got to put those away to one side, and then you get to keep the bit that's left over after those commitments. So there are lifestyle things you've got to get used to as well. And so I have found, though, most of the people I work with, they're all busy.
Yeah. But I think also what you've identified is that it's not just being a barrister. You've got to be somebody who's good at kind of having relationships with solicitors, bringing work in that way. You've got to manage your own accounts. You've got, you're responsible. You might employ an accountant, but you're responsible for managing your finances and things like that, isn't it? So it is a kind of, there's quite a lot of aspects to being a barrister, more than just here's some work presented.
Things you wouldn't expect. So I was asked to do, for example, people say, what have you done to sort of keep the relationships going with your solicitors? So I was just having a chat to one solicitor about holiday recommendations. I took another solicitor out we went to the pub and had a pint. Another one, we went for dinner. I've just recently given a talk in Chambers to a group of about 50 different solicitors on artificial intelligence, and talking about the challenges of working with AI. And so what you're doing is promoting yourself, promoting your chambers, promoting your group that you work with, but also your brand, your own brand. And you've got to be proactive. And I never had to do that as a police officer, because as a police officer, that's my lane. I'm just doing my cases. I'm just investigating and getting on with it. Now I have to be proactive and make sure I keep those relationships going and think about things I had no idea about, which was managing your own finances to the extent of all the different types of accounts you need to run, and making sure you're on top of all of that, because you can get into a mess quite quickly if you're not able to manage all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you were, so just to go back in time a little bit, when you were kind of doing your law degree and thinking about you kind of already sort of committed to thinking you want to be a barrister, what kind of things did you do, if anything, to kind of help with that? Did you do like mini pupilages? Did you do anything to do with mooting? What kind of things did you try to do to kind of help as that process when you were thinking about then going to make those applications for pupillage?
I think it's actually essential that if you really mean it, if you want to do this career, is to push yourself forward to experience things. So what that means, so there are different things you can do. You can go for what's called a mini pupillage you've identified. So I did about 4, I think it was, something like that. So that's where you apply in a very informal way, but there's usually an email process to a chambers, or you might see somebody that you know and you ask if you could be put on the list. And they will allow you to follow for perhaps 2 or 3 days, something like that, a barrister who's willing to have you as you call it a mini pupil, or you're just basically going along to watch, a bit like you would be in your first 6 of pupillage proper. But what that means is you're a prospective applicant at some point. You're wanting to show an interest in chambers, and you want to understand a little bit about that area of work. And I would recommend doing it not only in the area of law you're interested in, but in a couple you're not so sure. And so you then can see them and talk to them. You have an opportunity to have a barrister on tap for 3 days or whatever it is, and ask them questions about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And most of them are very patient. I've done it with people where they'll follow you and sit behind you while you're doing your case. You've obviously got to do your work, but then you'll have moments to have a coffee, again, more coffee, a sandwich at lunch, perhaps at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, and just talk about, well, this is what I'm doing. This is the type of cases I'm doing. Have you got any questions about life at the bar? So do mini pupilages. The one thing I did with the Open University, and I cannot recommend this enough, is mooting. which sounds like a really old-fashioned term. And you will remember, Francine, a fantastic chap called Gary Slapper.
Yes.
And we started with some friends of mine. We started a bit of a, I don't know if it'd been running beforehand at any point, but we certainly started up a mooting sort of team through the Open University, and we challenged different universities across the country. And it was the Law Reports annual mooting competition, and I know it carried on for a few years after we did it. We got to the
and it's still very vibrant. There's still lots of meeting going on. It's still very successful.
But things like that, because that basically is a competition for advocacy, and you get given a law problem. For those of you who haven't done it, you then prepare submissions, a bundle, and you get to be terrified by being put in front of real judges who will then giving up their own time, and you will be scored on what you do. And we went through various rounds and we went to Gray's Inn, and we went to the Law Society. We had a lovely meal with people from the OU who came along to support us, and it was a great time in London at the Law Society down there. And that sort of experience gives you experience just speaking, doing advocacy, talking to others about the profession, and you'll find most barristers and judges are very keen to support those because they remember what it was like when they started, and you've got all these questions and you're not sure, and it just gets stuck in. So do that, and then look at any other voluntary options. There are often different organisations that offer support for members of the public. You don't always need to be fully qualified to provide some of that support. So you could sometimes volunteer at law centres, things like that, if you've got some experience. And there might be other aspects that you can get involved in, but do go out there and speak to chambers, try and experience it, get involved in competitions, all of that stuff, which is proactive. And then you've got something to put on your CV and your applications as well.
Yeah. So are you involved at all? Do you do any do you get involved in the pupillage system within your chambers? Can you just talk a little bit about that? Applying for pupillage is obviously hugely competitive. I think there's something like just over 400 applications, aren't there? Pupillages that are available each year. So it's highly competitive. So could you just give us some reflections from your experience, like 12 years ago, applying for pupillage, and kind of how we are now, and sort of some of the top tips that you would sort of recommend for students thinking about making an application for pupillage?
So there's an online application form which goes on something called, I think it's still called the Pupillage Gateway, which goes on there, and you can apply to different chambers. Normally, they will advertise their vacancies on there, so it's quite a good central sort of repository. You can go on it and you can see where the applications are. Some chambers like to do it the old-fashioned way, and they'll just on their own website, they'll advertise them. But most of them are on this system, and then they have a sort of set format of their own, of general questions, and then there'll be questions that are specific to that particular set of chambers. So that's where it comes back to, if you've done a mini pupillage at one of those chambers that you think is a particularly good one, that's why it's really good, because it shows you've developed an interest in what they do. Or it could be something as simple as, I've researched this about some of the cases people from chambers have done, that sort of thing. I don't want to sugarcoat this, because you need to go into it with a realistic mindset, which is that the chambers I got in at, I think there were 2 people who were taken on the year I got in. There were 500 per post that was taken on. And so it's not easy. No. And so the reality is you do need to be good enough to stand out from the crowd to an extent that it's not no smoke and mirrors behind it, but it's you need to show commitment, some academic ability, and a willingness to work hard and to develop and be a team player. And that sounds weird when you're talking about a career where you're on your feet on your own as you're self-employed, but it isn't just about that. You've got chambers life to be involved in. And so the application process is very challenging, because then once you get through the paper sift, as they call them, once you're through that, you then go to the interview process, and normally it would be 1 or 2 interviews. So more often than not, it's at least a couple. So you might go to a first interview where they're really just checking that you're human. And these days, they'll just be checking that you are a real person rather than just using an AI application. and that you can actually speak in sentences, and that you're normal, and so that they'll test you out, and they'll filter it down, and then they might take you to a final interview round, where you might have some practical exercises.
Yep.
Which would be, it might be something like, we've got a bail application, we'd like you to appear for the defendant in a bail application and argue he should have bail. Off you go. Here are the circumstances. And they might give you, as I did at one chambers, here are 3 news stories. We've got 20 minutes to read them, and we're going to ask you some questions about them.
Mm-hmm.
Or it might be, here's an article about a recent judgment. We want you to write a summary of it, and talk about some of the positives and negatives that come from it. And so you have to do that. And so there could be lots of different ways that they test you. And some of it's just a panel of people sat in front of you, apprentice style, firing questions at you. So that's the sort of interview process.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of people do get pupillagers. So, there are pupillagers out there. And it's not just self-employed. I'm talking about sort of applying to chambers there. There are employed routes to the bar where, so just as an example, some people will work in-house as a barrister, government legal services where you do more drafting. There are other routes to becoming a barrister than just simply self-employed at the chambers in the traditional way. But there you go.
Yeah. But I think it's important to recognise that it is a competitive process. But as you say, people are successful, and anybody who's interested, last year we did a talk with Laurie Elizabeth Catley and Liam Chin. You can watch that recording. Both of them are OU students who got pupillage and were very successful. Laurie works in family law and Liam works in criminal law. So I think it's important to recognise it is tough, but you can get there. But you've got to really, the thing is, you've got to really want it, haven't you?
You have. There's no substitute for that. And there's so much competition that they'll find you out there's no point wasting your time or anybody else's if you're not really committed to doing it. So do the research before you get to that point. I'm sure everybody would, so it would be, you'll find that it's the career I really want to do. And if you think that's right for you, then you can keep pushing. And not everybody gets pupillage the very first time round they apply.
Yeah.
So you can apply over 2, 3, 4 years. And I know someone who got pupillage, I think it was 7th or 8th time of trying, from my cohort of students on the bar course, the BPTC. And well done to them. And she got pupillage with the Crown Prosecution Service, and it was 8 years, I think it was, after we'd finished the course. And that's pretty impressive. That's a commitment.
Yeah, absolutely. To keep going back. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
We've had another question. So, you mentioned AI, which I thought was quite interesting beforehand. So, do you think AI will reduce workload in the future and allow for a better work-life balance, or do you think, how is AI changing sort of because we know a lot about it in terms of solicitors a lot, but and litigants in person using AI, but how is it impacting on the bar?
Have you seen that great thing with the New York Supreme Court where there's an AI advocate is put on the screen and the judge goes crazy when she realizes it's not actually a barrister or a lawyer in the New York Supreme Court. Obviously, I think it's been noted that people at lower level or entry level starting points as litigators or solicitors are going to have a harder challenge to get through, because those at senior ranks probably are where they are, but it's going to be harder to do those entry level points and then gain the experience to then move up. They're going to have to find a way to allow people to still keep moving through. I think there's going to continue to be a need for advocacy and for barristers and human beings to interact with judges, the court systems, tribunals, and the lay clients and the solicitors, and facilitate all of that. I think some of it will really help. I'll give you an example. I was reviewing a case where an officer was accused of cheating on some exams, and I used AI to help me look through the exam papers to see the differences between the papers.
Okay.
And then look at the similarities, and then looked at my instructions, and then compared to what they actually did. Now, what that can't replace is double checking it all yourself to make sure
Yeah.
it's correct. But what it did do is set me off in the right path.
Mm-hmm.
What you shouldn't do is what lots of people, or not lots, quite a number have got involved in is relying on AI to give you an idea on how to write a skeleton argument and then relying on it complete without checking it.
Yeah.
Because AI has a tendency to make up some of the entries and some of the citations,
Yes.
which is never a good place to be, because you'll be off to your regulator or committing an offence in court by making stuff up. I think AI will help in some ways. I think we're still going to be busy, and I think actually the law will need humans to still provide the safety net, but also the personal touch for lay clients as we go forward. So it's going to keep. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I knew exactly how it's going to change in time to come, but it's going to impact us, I'm sure, in ways I can't even imagine. There's a company I did the presentation with I did recently called Leap AI, and they're trying to provide support to. This is not an advertisement for them, by the way. It's just an example of what's happening. A support to legal professionals, so in their practice, their daily practice. So there's lots of people trying to jump on that avenue and that bandwagon to see if they can monetize that aspect of legal practice as well.
Yeah. And then sort of slightly moving away, when you're kind of dealing with other barristers and things like that, have you seen, are people kind of, because obviously you can go down the solicitor route and you can be a solicitor, or then you can go through the higher rights and get higher rights of audience as a solicitor. Do you come across solicitors in that role frequently, or is it mainly barristers that you're dealing with?
Both. So definitely both. And so I know lots of people in the Crown Court solicitors who've got higher rights and they've come through, or people that are involved in tribunal work where and there's a bit of a crossover between those that are solicitors. So I've appeared against solicitors and I've been instructed by them. So there's more than one way to, I don't like this phrase, actually, skin a cat. Yeah, there are lots of ways to get into the law, aren't there, which are, it's not always immediately obvious. You might want to, you might get the foot in the door as a paralegal in some way. That might take you through to, and I know lots of people that have been solicitors for many years, but then decided really their passion was advocacy, and they've changed tracks. So they've moved across, they've had to do additional qualifications, but they've then they've got higher rights of audience, and then some of them have done the full conversion to become a barrister away from being a solicitor. Some remain as solicitors with higher rights. So it's definitely both.
Yeah. So there are other options, aren't there? So if you think that it might be more, I don't think there's. If you look at the number of training contracts, what used to be training contracts, now qualifying work experience, there are more of them, but it's still equally as competitive. But there are routes. If you decide to start as a solicitor, you can then think about moving across and doing more advocacy work. And we've got 5 minutes left, so I've got a couple of things to ask you. Okay. One is, do you have any aspirations to become a judge? Is that an element of your practice that you might think about kind of later on? Because that's another option, isn't it? That you work absolutely. A long time as a barrister or a solicitor, you might then think about kind of moving into the judiciary. Is that something that you have an aspiration towards, or do you still want to be on your feet?
I like being on my feet, although I can't say I have thought about it on occasions, and you'll find if you go to any Crown Court on a daily basis, there are judges, so you might see the name on the court list, HHJ, so his or her honour, judge, whatever it might be. You might also see recorder, such a body. Now, the recorder is normally the head judge of any court centre, but recorder Smith or recorder Jones, whatever, that might be a part-time judge. So there are lots of options to apply to become a part-time judge. So you might think it's strange, but actually what happens a lot is that's the way people start to move towards the judiciary and change a career. There's often an option to have a completely new career in the judiciary some years down the line. So you can do an exam and then you can apply to become a part-time judge, and you have so many sitting days a year. I think it's something like you need to sit for at least 35 or 40, I think, something like that. It's usually more than that. You can also apply to sit as a chair on first-tier tribunal cases. You might hear cases. I've done cases previously for Ofsted matters, or health cases in the first tier tribunal, and you could apply to sit there or apply to sit as a district judge in the magistrates court. There are different judicial opportunities. So the law can take you off in lots of strange ways, as you know. Yeah.
Definitely. So my final question then. So what is the best bit of your job and what's the hardest part of your job? I'm not going to say the worst, but the kind of hardest part of being a barrister. But maybe we'll start with the hardest bit, and then we'll end on a positive with the best bit.
Okay. The hardest bit is sometimes the unrelenting nature of the work, and it is hard work, and you've got to accept that's part of it. And I do find that a challenge at times when, you know, some of your friends might be off, they're just finished work, that's what they're doing, they're off to do whatever it is they might do, and you've got to just finish that skeleton argument that you promised that you'd have in for the next day, or you've got to prepare for the next day's court appearance. That's hard. The greatest bit is representing lay clients who are at their lowest ebb and they need you, and they've got no one else to turn to, and they may feel all is lost, but you've looked at the case and you can see, actually, there's something in this. I think we can turn this around, or I think we can present this in a certain way. And it might be an acquittal, defending somebody in the Crown Court after doing a jury speech. My favourite speeches are, I'll do a story. So I might give the jury a Sherlock Holmes story and then tie it into the actual case that I like to sort of bring it back to something. I once did a story about Sully, the film, about the aircraft that landed on the Hudson, and talked about the concentration required and all of that sort of thing. And when you see it engage and you see the case turn in your favour, and then the relief, the joy, and that you've helped somebody who needed help at that point. It might be prosecuting a case and getting a good outcome. I prosecuted some murder cases and seeing that you get the right outcome, and you see the importance that is to families, or representing somebody who's accused of professional misconduct and the allegations fall away and they get to keep their job, and that's their career and their family's safeguarded for years. When you've got that satisfaction of supporting somebody who needs it, there's nothing greater than that.
Wow, I think that's a fantastic moment to end. Yeah, and I think it's huge responsibility, but hugely rewarding responsibility, isn't it? Thank you so much, Julian. Everybody, I've been asking the questions hopefully in the chat. We probably could have talked for about another 2 hours, but I hope I've covered lots of things that you would have asked. Huge thank you to Julian for coming out tonight. Polly, if you wouldn't mind ending the recording, and just a plug for Polly, tomorrow's sessions while we end the recording are, can you